The coalition summit ended in a huge uproar, yelling and bickering. The press isn't reporting about it again. And to back it all up again, a day after the Villa Boa Sieg, I said that Friedrich Merz was yelling like a madman, which only came out 14 days later. And exactly this person provided me with information again today. And I have to tell you, what happened yesterday is the beginning of the end for anyone here in Germany who still has any understanding for the SPD and CDU. And that's exactly what we're going to look at today. It's going to be extremely explosive. If you'd like to support this channel, I would really appreciate a like and a subscription.
They sat together for 6 hours. In the end, however, the leaders of the CDU, CSU bloc and the SPD left the chancellery in silence.
By the way, the mediator had already fled beforehand. Yes, the one who was supposed to mediate between the CDU and SPD left before everyone else, saying that he couldn't mediate here anymore. The situation was so extremely explosive and delicate that he had no business being there anymore. And I mean, he's the mediator. What is it all about exactly? Above all, it's about pensions. A very important point where I personally have to say, hey, if they push this through, then they've completely lost the favor of the voters. But there are also some relief measures. They now want to possibly freeze the carbon tax, but only if it really goes through. And then there were a few points of contention that led to absolute frustration and disaster.
Apparently, there will be a written statement during the day. However, a joint press conference has not been announced so far.
Of course, I only know what happened there and not what will be in the press release. But I'm just going to go out on a limb and say they've now found a roadmap for what they can finally do better for Germany. And what actually happened there? The CDU brought up things like brace yourselves, stripping all privileges from pensioners, then drastically cutting funds for, among others, trade unions. And let me ask you directly, do you seriously believe that after Friedrich Merz was so harshly criticized by the trade unions yesterday, he sat in the chancellery in a good mood and really looked Baas and Klingbeil in the eyes and said, so we're going to try now to just turn things around? No, instead they just announced to the outside world that we have a roadmap. Only the argument yesterday, when the pension issue came up, must have escalated so much that even Baas and Klingbeil supposedly completely lost it at the table and supposedly asked him how he came up with such a ridiculous idea.
That shows how tense the relationship in the CDU-SPD coalition still is. However, one could also say that silence is better than arguing in public.
Let's start with the positive things before we get into the absolute disaster of what exactly happened. The carbon price will not be increased further in 2027. If they were to take this step now, they would lose all the citizens' trust. By the way, they reached this consensus without any argument. And then the topic of pensions came up. And when, I would say, all of Friedrich Merz's facades came crashing down, that's when the situation started to escalate. They want to cut all additional benefits for all retirees, even those who are already retired, because we can no longer refinance them. And then he said things like Chancellor's authority, the authority to set policy guidelines. He's the Chancellor. And if that didn't work, then they would have to form a minority government with him as Chancellor, of course, and look for changing majorities, for example, together with the Greens, which, by the way, is actually not enough, as he was told yesterday. And this person became increasingly aggressive. That was the tone of the conversation. I'm keeping it very vague. Of course, I don't want to really expose anyone here.
On the agenda were further relief measures for the high energy prices, the ongoing reform roadmap, and discussions about the 2027 budget.
Let's get straight to the tax increases. There will be tax increases, and probably even in the value-added tax, because they want to ease the burden on the poor. Yes, that's right, exactly. No, of course not. Because that's exactly what the SPD absolutely rejects. They still say that the rich must be taxed. And with that, the topic of taxes was simply off the table. Friedrich Merz will now go ahead and first invite the trade unions in July to consult with them again. There are still 2 appointments left before the summer break. because they want to tide themselves over until the elections in Saxony-Anhalt, because they don't want to ruin their poll numbers, or maybe they're afraid that the AfD could gain even more. That's why they've only agreed on the labor market for now. And what's coming makes me sick to my stomach.
Shortly before midnight, the leaders of the coalition leave the chancellery. For 6 hours, the CDU, CSU and SPD have been discussing behind closed doors.
And then it was Jens Spahn who accidentally sent a text message this morning and totally let the cat out of the bag. That's right, exactly. Public holidays are supposed to be eliminated to increase our productivity. Furthermore, the 8-hour workday is supposed to be extended to boost economic performance here in Germany. Things must have completely escalated when these demands were brought up again and reaffirmed by the CDU and CSU, because otherwise this ideological nonsense couldn't be paid for anymore. Things must have completely escalated at that point. And the mediator then also said, I have nothing left to do here. Are you still talking it over? I'm out. I don't feel like it anymore. So it must have gotten really heated there. Wild insults, some people were yelled at and called names. I just wonder, where did workplace safety go in all of this?
But concrete decisions apparently aren't even planned. Even before the meeting began, sources from the union and SPD circles said that no results were to be expected.
Did you catch what was all over the news yesterday? D-Day paper. And when the FDP did that and government collapse and government crisis and all that, and then all of a sudden, yeah, we agreed that we're not going to do anything. And then it was just a single employee who confirmed it with a text message. That's what I heard about today. Namely, that they really went at each other's throats and that no one wants to do it anymore. Everyone will now only continue this forced marriage out of fear, if they have to, for 3 years. To do nothing. There is no relief. They can't afford it. The budget will continue to be misused, just like how they plan to set up the 2026, 2027 budget somehow. They have no idea that was the general tone yesterday, and actually the last slogans from the mediator, who just left the meeting, to everyone else are just words. They left without anything actually working. We can't work together like this. It just doesn't work. Verbal Bass is the problem in this coalition. Lars Klingbeil is the second big problem in this coalition, because they only have one agenda: to tax the rich, and here the CDU says no, it doesn't work. The fiscal gaps are so big that soon the interest won't be able to be paid back without tough reforms, which we urgently need right now. And they basically found this country in ruins, but they don't want to tell the citizens. Because of the election polls, because they're afraid that there could be a huge shift in North Rhine-Westphalia, in Saxony-Anhalt, in Mecklenburg-Western Pomerania, then in Berlin, then in North Rhine-Westphalia, and then in Lower Saxony. And then they would have even lost a large part of the federal council, and now they're just trying to save themselves from one election to the next. That's why they came up with the clever idea to only schedule appointments in mid-June, to schedule appointments in July, and until then, just wait. And to keep working before causing even more damage, you just can't wrap your head around that anymore.